Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New View podcast. My name is Mac.
And my name is Megan.
Come along with us as we dive into the world of competitive Irish dancing and beyond,
sharing perspectives, developing community, and learning from each other.
We hope you enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of New View. Today, this episode is just Megan and I, but we wanted to dive into an interesting concept shared in a podcast interviewing Alexi Pappas, who is a former NCAA runner.
So my Olympic coach told me after a particularly challenging workout where I could not hit my splits before going to the Rio Olympics, that was okay. It was the rule of thirds. And he was an Olympian. So I always soaked in everything he said. And I was like, what's the rule of thirds? And he said, when you're chasing a dream or doing anything hard, you're meant to feel good a third of the time, okay a third of the time, and crappy a third of the time. And if the ratio is roughly in that range, then you're doing fine. So today was the crappy day along your dream chasing.
Right.
And if the ratio is off, like you feel too good all the time or too bad, then you got to look at if you're fatiguing or not trying hard enough or pushing yourself.
Okay, so that's the clip we wanted to share. And I actually saw that clip quite a while ago, and I was just happy to see it again come up on my feed because I think it's such a good reminder. And I really love that concept. I think it's a really useful way to sort of think about your training and think about your dream chasing. But yeah, I definitely think when I reflect back on my dancing career, luckily, I think I would say that rule pretty much did apply. Like a third of the time, things were going great. A third of the time, it was really rough. And then a third of the time was just kind of like another day. But what do you think of that, Megan? Like, does that apply to your experience?
Yeah, I would totally say that applies to my experience as I look back on my life in dancing. But I also think it's something for every dancer to consider, like while they're still dancing, because we don't often realize that this is a theme, I would say, or when you're really chasing a huge goal, you might find yourself like thinking very positively, finding all the best ways to stay motivated. And then when a bad day happens, it's so easy to kind of spiral out of control and not know what to do. Or when you hit a bit of a plateau kind of couple of days and everything's just fine, all of a sudden lacking that kind of motivation and excitement around your goals is quite shocking. And I think especially for younger dancers, they just don't know that that's part of the journey, and not to dissuade them from pursuing goals or make the process seem negative, but it is part of just the journey in dancing to have the highs and the lows and the many days in between, and just learning that this concept, the rule of thirds, exists and is part of the process, I think is quite powerful.
Totally. And I think, tell me what you think of this if you experience this too. But I think one of the things I struggled with the most was like when I was in one of those, rough days, I really struggled to trust that, there was good days still coming. I think I felt very much like that was a permanent situation. So, I'd go into the studio and, sometimes it's explainable and sometimes it's not explainable. Like sometimes you go in and you know that you're fatigued or you know that you had a rough day at school and, that's kind of influencing your headspace or whatever. Like sometimes you can kind of explain where it's coming from. And then other times, everything on paper could be pointing to this is going to be a great day. And then for whatever reason, it's just not. And things are not working and everything feels hard or nothing's working or you can't get the step or whatever it might be. I think something I really struggled with, and even later in my career, but especially earlier, was like trusting, like, okay, this is just one of those days. Like this is just one of those crappy days, and it's okay. Like, okay, that one's now over with. Um, Whereas my mind would go to like, oh my gosh, this is how I'm dancing now, and this is how it's going to be forever. And so I don't know. I think for me, hearing about this concept is useful in the sense of like when you're in one of those crappy days, like maybe you can just, remind yourself that there's a good day around the corner and it can feel like this is going to be permanent and for like going to last forever. But just know, like there might be a pretty okay day coming for you, or there may be a great day coming for you, or there might be a string of pretty crappy days, and then that maybe becomes something you need to look at, like Alexi was saying in that video. But just using it as a way of like trusting the process a little bit more, I think it's a really useful concept, and maybe something others can benefit from as well. Um, what do you think about using it as also like a tool of adjust or I guess monitoring your training, in that sense? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's the perfect way to use this kind of concept because it provides reason for these things that come up in a dancing journey and just a training cycle that are truly unexplainable. Like you said, you could do everything just right and have the perfect meal plan and sleep just the perfect amount of hours and do everything, but yet still have a bad day. Or you could do everything wrong and have a great day, you know?
Yeah.
That provides a framework for just saying, you know what, sometimes life is unpredictable, and sometimes in its unpredictability, it produces great results, and I have an amazing day. Sometimes it produces terrible outcomes, and I have the worst day. But, most of the time, I'm kind of just at a medium. And I think that's really helpful for dancers who find themselves kind of existing almost in a vacuum of, okay, I need this to be a perfect, amazing day. And then the second something is off, you're like totally alone, goals go out the window, you overthink. And that's super isolating. I think having this kind of concept to come back to and even like talk about with your dance teacher or your friends at the studio, be like, oh, I'm kind of having an off day, or I'm kind of having a good day, or I'm in my third of like down right now. Just having that as a framework, I think, is powerful to provide reason for kids. A lot of the time, otherwise, you're just spent wondering and curious and worrying, kind of out of control. And I think using that as your framework and basis to just establish a kind of natural flow of your training is super helpful. And I can't imagine, well, now knowing this older in my dancing career, it helps a lot. But if I were to learn it when I was much younger, I could see how that would really positively impact me instead of spending days or weeks or months feeling like I was on that kind of downward trajectory when all I needed was a little check-in or knowledge that this kind of thing didn't last forever because you're on your own kind of journey and pursuit in the world of Irish dancing. And this just, for me, is a really powerful tool that you can use to feel less alone in that we all kind of have a similar journey of thirds and to provide some sort of meaning in what we're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's important to point out too that these are like, it's like a general ratio, it's a general concept. It's not saying like, oh, you're gonna have a great day, medium day, bad day, great day, medium day. It's not gonna go in that like perfect cycle necessarily. Like maybe it will. But I definitely think that it's probably gonna be a little more sporadic. And I think, hopefully lots of you guys listening have had those stretches of time where you're like, whoa, I like can't do anything wrong. Like everything's just flowing and it's fantastic. And then definitely too, we've all been there where it's like 2 weeks of just a slog for whatever reason. And you're just like, okay, maybe I'm not meant to do this or whatever. But I think just, I do want to talk a little bit about, okay, how can we use this as a training tool for adjusting if necessary too, but also just giving yourself and just kind of looking at it with a bit more of a flexible sort of outlook in that it's not going to be a perfect set of thirds, but just kind of coaching yourself through and going like, okay, like it's just one of those days and one of those periods of time, right? And trusting like there are some good days around the corner maybe or whatever it is. Um, yeah, and as far as using it as a training tool, I think obviously maybe the most obvious indication here is like, okay, if we're having way more than a third of days that are, crappy days or just really rough days, like maybe that's indicating, okay, maybe you're a little burnt out, like maybe you're overly fatigued. Maybe that's an indication you need to take a little break or do something different. Or like if you're in a real like maybe plateau sort of phase where every day is just kind of mid, like it's just kind of whatever, then maybe that's an indication that you just need to change things up or change up your schedule or seek out some new inspiration or whatever that might be. But I think maybe the least obvious one is when everything maybe just, and maybe this isn't that common, but if everything's just feeling great and easy all the time, that is maybe an indication that things are not in equilibrium either, or like maybe you're not training in the most efficient way possible, in the sense of like maybe you're not pushing yourself enough, or like, I don't know. Do you think that that's possible too? And how do you think people can like use that as an indication of what they need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably comes up less often than those kind of middle of the road days or not so great days, but it is true that we all get those stretches of really, really great days. And I think to be a smart and efficient athlete, you can look at it and say, okay, like where do I have the time or the space or the resources or the energy to add a little bit more? It doesn't necessarily have to be okay, I'm on like a really good, amazing stretch. I have to add 10 hours of practice this week or do like a stamina drill every single day, because then you're going to find yourself on the other end of this spectrum and be introduced to many bad days in a row. But I think through some nice assessment, you can find ways to just push yourself a little, whether that's, hey, I could spend some more time doing like mental imagery and visualizing my performance if we're coming up on like competition season, or hey, maybe I can capitalize on my practice time a little bit more and use my at-home space for drilling and then really go hard with the stamina and step repetitions and classes and stuff. Thinking in ways to capitalize on your training rather than rework it,
Hmm.
I would say would be how I would hope to go about it. Now, I don't know that I would always do that because sometimes I do get a little like, oh, I just need to do a stamina drill every day, and then I find myself in the string of bad days. But to make this like as healthy as possible, I think um a general idea of like capitalizing on what you're already doing and also knowing that you don't need to rework the whole system, right? Things
Hmm.
are working for a reason, things are going well.
Hmm.
So don't necessarily change what you're doing, but adapt, fit in what you can,
Hmm.
and go from there. And I think it's a similar process for if you're also having a stretch of really bad days. You kind of can do the same and say, okay, there's got to be at least one or two things that are working for me here. Maybe I'm spending a really good amount of time each week dancing, but am I using it to my like strongest abilities? Am I giving each section the time it deserves? Or am I kind of going to practice for 10 hours a week, but spending half of each practice like sitting on my butt or not stretching or working on a piece that's already really strong rather than working on a more challenging section. And so you
Hmm.
can kind of do the reverse with things as you have a stretch of really, really good days and when you have a stretch of those rough days to look at it objectively and say, okay, I'm doing this well. I'm identifying like these three, four, or five things that are going well because they always exist. Even if they're hard to come up with, they do exist. And then at the same time say, okay, what are three ways I could take actionable steps to improve? Whether that's to push harder, to give myself some more patience, or to rest more, whatever it is. I would handle those kinds of situations. I think what's most difficult, actually, and my question for you, Mac, is how would you do that with those kind of plateau days?
Yeah, sort of like the mid-range days where you're kind of just like maybe going through the motions and things feel like fine, not particularly terrible, but not particularly amazing either. I mean, sometimes I think just a change is like even just a simple change is all that you need to do, and maybe like think a little outside of the box. Um, I don't know. I feel like when I would have those stretches of time where you're just kind of, they're not bad. Like I think they're necessary in terms of just solidifying good habits and really like ingraining those good habits in your dancing and technique and all that kind of thing. Um, but I think we can like almost rest into that too much. And I think, I almost want to, I guess, qualify what each of these sections of time are, like good versus middle versus like bad, because bad, I like sometimes you're maybe feeling bad in the sense of like your performance is not where you want it to be, or you're feeling particularly fatigued, or things just feel really uncomfortable. But, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that's an indication of growth. Like sometimes that is exactly what you want to be feeling because it means like you're making changes. And, your body is not going to feel just like super at ease and like great necessarily in those periods of growth. Like it can be very uncomfortable if when you're like pushing outside of your like current boundary of ability, right? So I don't know. I think that's worth saying too, is sometimes those stretches of bad days are not necessarily bad. I do think sometimes they are an indication of like maybe you're getting burnt out. Like maybe you have done too many stamina days in a row, and maybe you're getting hyper fixated on a certain way of doing things, and it's just making the idea of going to the studio like, oh, that's the last thing I want to do. And I think that's important to be really objective and really honest with yourself, because I think sometimes, at certain periods of the year, like we just get tired and it's easy to sort of just rest into that and like maybe let ourselves off the hook a bit too much, like at the first sight of like, oh, I'm tired. But I also think there's legitimate times when you're burnt out, and, taking 3 days to even just go to the gym and work out a different way, or like go on walks instead, or like give yourself a total break is sometimes necessary. I'm totally going on a tangent from answering your question, which was like, how do you get out of those plateau phases? I mean, I think there's an infinite number of ways that you can do that. I think just, talk to your friends. Careful that those conversations don't just end up being like a negative downward spiral, though, because sometimes I think we can all do that. Of one person says, "Oh, like I'm just kind of tired and whatever," and then the next person goes, like, "Yeah, me too," and then everybody's just like, right? That being said, you can still use your friends as sources of motivation and inspiration. But maybe even too, like you said a little bit ago in this conversation, like use this rule of thirds as a framework for describing what you feel like you're experiencing with your teachers. Like if you're able to kind of put it in these terms, that might be a really easy way for them to go like, "Oh, I see how you're experiencing that. Like maybe let's try this, maybe let's try that." Like oftentimes teachers are such good resources that I think we often do use them, but sometimes we don't think about asking them and going to them for things like this. Um, so that can be really awesome too. And, I feel like I'm always saying this on this podcast, but don't be afraid to like look for sources of inspiration that are more unexpected. Like maybe a certain piece of music that has nothing to do with Irish dancing inspires you, or maybe you go on a run and see somebody else on a run and they're wearing a cool outfit, and then you're like, "Ooh, I like that outfit." And then you get like, I know it seems so out of, disjointed, but really sometimes it's just like the smallest thing of like, let me get a new t-shirt, like let me wear a different t-shirt to dance, or let me do my makeup differently, or, just little things to change it up, I think can be beneficial in that sense too. I have one more question before we wrap up this conversation. Um, what about those instances? I know I've felt them, and actually it's almost quite like clockwork when it's like the last couple weeks before a major or like a competition or something, and it feels like you're in a slump, like you're in a stretch of these not so good days. And like Alexi Pappas was saying this in her video, she was like in the lead up to the Rio Olympics and feeling like she was in a stretch of the bad days or whatever. It's like, how do you manage that? Like, how do you handle that? And have you experienced that? And if you have, what do you do?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, that's a really good question. And yes, I have experienced them. I think I've had kind of all of the different levels of the thirds in the lead up to a really important competition and meaningful competition for me going into worlds many times I've felt the, ooh, I'm in kind of a rough spot, like having a string of days where I feel really tired and a little burnt out. And I think that's pretty typical for a lot of people. Right as you're heading into worlds, you've been dancing almost every single day, and your body is just like ready to get to dance day and then have a bit of a break. I think that's a pretty universal dancing experience, but I have also had stretches where I'm like, whoa, really on a bit of a high and kind of unexpectedly killing it every day or whatever, which sounds amazing and great, but that for me almost causes more worry because all I want to do
Mm,
is make it last as long as possible. But then I would say most often I'm having those days where it's just pretty solid and good. And what I try to do to stay in my best headspace as possible, like while that is playing out is something I actually learned from Mackenzie here. Um, I always repeat to myself, like, this is within me, whether it's a really good day and I have to step up and, like, I want to make a really great reel happen. It's within me to do a great reel. I have to be careful with my definition, though, however. I can't define a good reel or a strong reel as the best I've ever felt, the most amazing thing ever. I receive only positive feedback. That's when I am at the highest risk of falling out of my good stretch, because I make unrealistic um terms of what it means to be good or to do a good job. And the same is true when I'm having kind of an off day. I tend to make unreasonable goals in terms of what it means to execute something well, when in reality, my best bet is to stick in more of that middle ground and say, hey, it's within me to do a good job, not to outperform and do my best ever. That's something that doesn't happen often. And it also doesn't happen often that I do my worst ever. So if I can do my best to just do what I know I'm capable of right here in the middle, that's how I'm going to get through this.
yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it is a matter of getting through it. Like that last week before the Oireachtas or the Feis or the Worlds, you're like, okay, I just have to make it through this. It's not necessarily that you're going to make those huge jumps in progress, right? It's just about
Hmm.
kind of maintaining where you are, and not in terms of maintaining that absolute high or maintaining that absolute low, but doing your best to just stick in the middle and say, I can do what's within me. I've repeated enough what I'm good at, what I know I can do. All I have to do is what's within me and let it go from there. And it sounds so simple and like a great trick, but I'll be honest, it's hard to do. You really have to train yourself and be on top of yourself in the moments when things are going really great or when you're having an amazing day to say, okay, I'm loving how great this day is feeling and how like on top of the world I feel, but I'm also going to take a deep breath and try and be as present as possible and say, you know what, I might wake up tomorrow and have a terrible day, or I might not feel like this for another while, but I know this level of execution is within me. And the same goes for those bad days,
Mm-hmm.
looking to find your like middle ground of strength and ability and like taking the time to catalog that in your brain as it's happening, I think is for me what's been the best hack in terms of staying kind of calm before a competition. Um, and doing my best to just exist within that rule of thirds. I will also say it's just part of the competitive journey to have those worries of saying, oh, I'm maybe not doing my best right now, or oh, I'm doing really, really great right now, and I don't want to fall out of that.
Hmm.
That's just part of it. It is unavoidable.
Hmm. I'm having so many thoughts as you're explaining all of that. One of them is I feel like a common theme is acceptance a little bit. And I think acceptance gets a bad rap because I think a lot of the time when people hear the term acceptance, it's kind of like, oh, well, just whatever, I don't really care. Like I'm just letting this all happen and it's whatever. I don't think of acceptance that way. I think of acceptance as kind of going like, okay, like what's going to happen is going to happen. And I trust that I'm going to do my best with whatever is happening, whatever's transpiring. And that kind of, to me, links back to what you were saying with the it's within me. Like whatever real is within me today is within me. And I'm going to like do my very best to bring out whatever I have within me right now. And that's enough. That's enough for whatever this day is going to be. And another thing too is I like your idea of like, I'm just going to be diligent with coming back to this midline a little bit. And it's really interesting how this conversation is evolving and how this whole concept is evolving too. But I like that idea of, especially in the lead up to competitions when it feels like things are becoming a pressure cooker. And it can be scary to be in like a crappy string of days, and it can be scary to be in a great string of days, depending on how you look at it. But the idea of like coming back to that midline, because I don't know, I'll speak for myself. I don't think I've ever had like an optimal day when I'm forcing it. When I go in there being like, this has to be a certain way, and like that, I don't think never has led to actually an amazing day. It's always just when I'm like just being like, and I'm just doing my thing and I'm like letting it come out of me. I'm not forcing it. And so I think that's a really cool practice and thing. It's a bit of an abstract concept, but something that could be really useful for people to think about is like your job is to just bring yourself back to like steady. Like bring yourself back to steady, do your reps. No one rep of a reel or rep of a hornpipe or whatever it is that you're doing like defines you as a dancer. Like that's just one dance that you're doing. And yeah, they all add up to something that adds up to something meaningful, but no one run of anything is like you defined as a dancer. And so it's kind of just accepting whatever is in any given day and doing your best with whatever is. And I think that that's pretty like a pretty cool way of approaching it, and something I'd like to carry with me, not just in terms of dancing, but like I think this applies to every other sport and like beyond sport and beyond performance, which I think is pretty cool. But I've super loved this conversation. I think it's just like a super interesting topic, and hopefully something that others find interesting and useful as well.
Absolutely. I hope people take away from today that the rule of thirds is a really great framework to kind of view your dancing and training and life from, and that just existing within that framework is enough. Most days you'll be right in the middle, some days will be great, and some days not so much, but you will come back to that middle ground, and that is enough.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of the New View podcast. We hope you enjoyed.
If you have any ideas about future guests we should interview or want to connect, you can find us on Instagram at newview.collective or email us at newviewcollective.mm@gmail.com.